Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to use watercolor pencils. This is a tin of 24 watercolor pencils by Derwent that I bought recently. Watercolor pencils are different to normal pencil crayons in that you put them down and then you can activate them with water and then they behave like watercolor paints. Here are the 24 colors, and a lot of the colors have got quite similar names to their corresponding paints, which comes as no surprise. I'm sure the same pigments are used in these pencils as go into the paints. I have also made a swatch card of the colors, just like I do with my watercolors, because sometimes they are quite different to what they look like just in the tin. So I have put down the pencil crown on each of these and then used water to activate them and tried to do a little bit of a dark to light gradient on each one. When it comes to the paper that I'm going to use for the watercolor pencils, you can use anything. I would suggest, though, not using, if you're going to activate it with water, I wouldn't use, say, normal printer paper because that's quite thin. Probably about at least a 180 GSM paper or heavier than that. I prefer, when I'm using watercolor pencils, to use a smooth hot press paper, but you can use cold press paper by all means. So let me show you an example using cold press. So the cold press paper has got indentations in it, as we know. So if I put the pencil crown down, you can see that the texture of the cold press paper does show through. I'm also just going to do a little bit more intense that side. So that's all fine and well, but then we will activate it with water. So if I wet my brush and then add the water, you can see how the pigment does get activated with the water, but with the cold press paper, you can see how, because of the grain of the paper, that texture remains. That might be something that you're looking for, but if you're wanting a smoother color, then I would choose a smoother paper. Also with the cold press, if I work it for long enough, then those ridges will disappear, but that is the reason why I prefer a smoother paper for watercolor pencils. So I showed you a little bit now with the cold press paper how the nature of watercolor pencils works, but let me show you again on the hot pressed paper. So you don't have a heavy water medium to mix your colors like you do in watercolor. If you're trying to, say, do a light wash or a darker wash, that is decided by how much pencil crown you put on the page before you start. So with the blue here, I'm going to do a dark to light gradient on my hot pressed paper. So I'm going to press quite dark there, and then I will let it go lighter. Then I'm going to use my water to activate it. Anytime that you've got a gradient with watercolor pencils and you're going to put your water down, my suggestion is that you start from the lightest end and then push your water back that way, because you'll see that the paint becomes, well, the pigment becomes very activated as soon as I put the water down. And if you start from the dark end to the light end, you can often drag the pigment with you, and then you get more of an even gradient, which is not what you were looking for in the first place. So I will start on the lighter edge here with the water and then push it this way. And there you can see the gradients. Once you've done it once, then you can rinse off your brush and then you can try and even it out a bit, going from dark to light if you wish. But you'll see then I don't get too much of the pigment dragging through to the lighter side. You can mix your watercolor pencils in the same way that you do your watercolor paints. It just looks a little bit different to watercolor paints until the point when you activate it with water. For example, if I wanted to mix a green out of yellow and blue using watercolor paints, I would do it in the mixing well. So I would put the yellow or the blue in first and then add the other color until I've got the green color that I like. You aren't able to do that with watercolor pencils. You've got to mix it on the page, and then that's where knowing how much or your ratio of your two colors to each other is important, because you can't actually see the green color that you're getting until you activate with water. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to make a green out of this yellow and the blue. So I'll put the yellow down first. It doesn't really matter which color I put down first. I'll put the yellow down and then I'll put the blue on top. So it just looks a bit really quite murky and grey at this point. But then I'll get my water, and it's when I activate the two together that I start getting the green. I was also quite annoyed with this tin initially, before I knew more about color mixing as I do now, that this tin didn't actually include a primary red color. There is this deep vermilion color, but it's not red by any means. And so then I thought, well, how on earth can I get red if red is a primary color? And I tried to investigate going and buying a single red, but I didn't, and I'm glad that I didn't. The penny dropped for me when I was doing my mixing sheet using my Daniel Smith Essentials watercolor set. So if you have a look here, the red, yellow and blue that is in the Daniel Smith, there's two red, yellows and blues, a cool and a warm of each. But inside this set, there is no primary red that we know of. And the reason for that is that despite what we might think, primary red, yellow and blue are not the primary colors for mixing paints. If you think about your color printer cartridge at home, the three colors in your printer cartridge are yellow, cyan and magenta. There is no red in those three colors, but it's possible to mix every single color from those three that are in the printer cartridge. And as I saw here, the Pyrrole Scarlet down here, which was the warm red inside the set, as soon as I added the Quinacridone Rose, which was the cool red, then all of a sudden we get a postbox or fire engine red from that. And so I can apply that same principle and exactly the same principles of color mixing to the watercolor pencils. And this is actually a two-part set, that's a series that I will link in the description box if you're wanting to have a look and investigate color mixing in more detail. So if I were to apply the same principle of the Daniel Smith Essentials set to this, if I wanted to turn this deep vermilion into a red, then I would have to add the cool red of Crimson Lake. I will do the two colors separately and then have a look at what they look like when I mix them. So that would essentially be a warm red, and then this Crimson Lake would be a cool red. Then I will activate with water, first individually and then together. And there you can see the mix of the two. I suppose to get more of a postbox red, I should have added more of the Crimson Lake, but you can see the principle behind it here, that also shows the difficulty and the challenge, I think, in mixing watercolor pencils, is that you kind of need to know in your mind before you start the ratio of the two colors to mix, because if I was mixing this in a watercolor well, I would simply now just add more of the Crimson Lake, because realizing that I hadn't added enough of the cool red. But now what I would have to do is I'd have to wait for this to dry, add a little bit more of the Crimson Lake on top, and then mix the two together. In this lesson, this is going to be the basic thing that I'm going to show using the sketches that I'm going to demonstrate. There are certainly other things that you can do with watercolor pencils. I've seen artists get a blade, for example, and shave off the pigment from here and then use those shavings and put them on a painting, activate them with water. For me, well, firstly, I think that's a bit of a schlep, to be honest. But I think that's sort of the next level up as in using watercolor pencils. And I'm just going to do a tutorial on the basic use and mixing of watercolor pencils today. So I'm going to use my watercolor pencils to color in these three flowers today. The link for the downloadable and traceable sketch reference for this can be found if you look in the link in the description box below. So I'm going to start with the flowers already sketched out, and I've used a Pigma Micron pen, a permanent pen, to do the outline on the flowers as well. You don't have to do the outline in pen if you want to. Pencil would be absolutely fine. I'm going to start with the cornflower, and I'll start with the top part here. I think I'm going to do a grading from yellow to a deeper orange red. So I'm going to have the light coming from the right hand side. So I'm going to start with my lightest yellow. Oh, just a bit about the book that I'm using. This is a Stillman and Byrne sketchbook. It is the Beta series book. It has got quite a smooth paper inside of it, which I really like. And the weighting is 270 GSM. So nice and heavily weighted. It's going to be able to carry the water, and it's smooth enough for my liking. So I'm going to start with the very light yellow up here on the top right. And then where I'm going to change to the next color, I'm going to do it a little bit lighter. So I've pressed quite hard there, and then I've pressed lighter here. To my medium yellow. And so I will work through and get warmer. So I can do the pencil and then put the water down and do that section by section, or I can do pencil on the whole sketch and then do the watercolor after and do the whole thing all at once. Then for the leaves, I think I'm going to do a purplish pink color. So I'm going to start with a deep purple on the center and then grade it out to a lighter color as I get to the edge of each leaf. I'll do it a little bit darker underneath here. There'll be shadow on this one. Also, there'll be a bit of shadow over there and over here. In some respects, I do feel that using watercolor pencils to create a sketch does feel like doing the whole process twice, because I've got to do this and then I've got to come and do the water layer on top. Firstly, I think that is true, but the water layer that you put on top is very quick. It's a lot quicker than doing the whole thing in watercolor, because your blending and your color choices and so on are already made. All that your water layer is doing is activating that color. But I also just think that there is the place and time for watercolor pencils. They are extremely convenient if you are, say, traveling, if you're in an aeroplane or a train and you don't want to get your full sketching gear out. Then doing this whilst you are in transit and then activating it quickly with water once you get home in a place that's more convenient is very convenient. And also I often will do this whilst I'm watching TV at night with a lap board on my lap, and then I don't have to have my whole painting gear set up. Whilst I'm whiling away watching something on TV, I can do the watercolor pencils and then quickly add the water once I'm back in my studio. I'm just going to warm up the center by just putting a little bit of Crimson Lake between the purple and the pink. Then for the green, I think I'll start with a light green and then do a darker green on the shadow side. So I will just do a little bit darker on the underneath here and over there. All right, let's do the water. So on the top here, the yellow is the lighter side. So I'm going to start with the water here and then shift it to the bottom left. Whilst I'm painting, I thought I would just let you know that my YouTube channel name is going to change at the end of June to Christine McLaren Art to align it with my Patreon channel name. And the colors just come up so beautifully rich once the watercolor goes down. And then you can do a bit of mixing like you do with watercolor. Now that I've got the darker pigment on my brush, I can try and do a little bit of texture up here. And then because it's not as wet as you do with watercolor, you can then move from that section to the next. So with the petals, I'm going to work from the outside in because the outside is the lightest color. And then with the stalk, I will work from the bottom up. And then you can have a look over. I mean, there are places where I didn't blend as well as I could. You can go over and just smooth those areas out if you want to, or you can just leave it as it is. But you can see how quick and easy it is once you put the water down. The hard work is all done by the time you've got your pencil crown colors down, and then you just do a quick layer over with the water. I'm going to now apply exactly the same principles to the remaining two flowers. The one observation that I do have with regards to watercolor pencils compared to watercolor paints is that because they are slightly more opaque than the watercolor paints, they do tend to cover up the black lines that I've got underneath more so than if I were painting over the pen in watercolor paints. So that is also something to keep in mind. You may want to do your ink afterwards if it's something that bothers you. If you are enjoying this tutorial and you would like to make a small donation to me, you will see a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box below. Putting these tutorials together takes an immense amount of work, and I really appreciate any and all donations, no matter how big or small. The payment platform is completely safe and secure. If you do make a donation, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And there's the final page spread of the flowers. Let me know what you think in the description box below. Also, let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see me paint. Until next time, bye for now.